There is a version of a person who sleeps comfortably, who never questions the ceiling above their head, who wakes up, follows the same schedule, earns the same paycheck, thinks the same thoughts, and calls it stability. And then there is the other kind, the kind who stared into the abyss of total failure, looked directly at the possibility of losing everything, of being publicly mocked, financially destroyed, professionally finished, and decided to keep going anyway. Not because it felt good, not because someone cheered them on, but because the mission was bigger than the fear. This is not a story about comfort. This is a story about what happens when a human being refuses, absolutely refuses, to accept the ordinary as the final answer. The world does not remember people who played it safe. The world remembers the ones who bet everything on what others called impossible. Great builders are not born great, they are forged, not in comfort, not in safety, not in classrooms where every answer is already written on the board. They are forged in the darkness of not knowing if tomorrow works, in the pressure of watching everything they built begin to collapse, in the silence of a room where nobody believes them except themselves. The greatest minds of any generation share one common trait, not genius, not privilege, not even luck. The single trait is this: they refuse to let the size of the obstacle determine the size of their effort. When a young person decides to leave the ordinary track, to abandon the safe road, the expected career, the pre-approved life, they are immediately tested, not by the market, not by investors, not even by competition. They are tested by their own mind, the internal voice that says, "Who are you to think differently? What makes you special? Why would this work for you when it failed for everyone else?" That voice is the first enemy, and most people never beat it. They silence their ambition before the world ever gets a chance to. But the rare ones, the builders, the visionaries, the ones who rewrite what is possible, they learn something that most people never understand. That voice is not wisdom. It is survival instinct wearing a suit. It is the brain's attempt to keep the body safe by keeping the spirit small. And once a person recognizes that, everything changes. The question stops being, "Is this too risky?" and becomes, "What is the actual cost of doing nothing?" Most people think by analogy. They look at what exists, they look at what others have done, and they copy, tweak, adjust, and repeat. That is not thinking. That is recycling. The builders who reshape industries do not begin with what is, they begin with what must be true. This is called first principles reasoning, and it is one of the most powerful cognitive tools any human being can develop. Here is what it looks like in practice. Instead of asking, "How has this always been done?" the first principles thinker asks, "What is this actually made of? What are the fundamental laws that govern this problem? If everything we assumed was wrong, what would be left that is undeniably true?" This is not philosophy for the sake of philosophy. This is a weapon. When an industry overcharges by 10 times what it should cost, the first principles thinker does not complain about the price. They break down the actual raw cost of every component. They find the gap between reality and belief, and they fill that gap with a better answer. Every breakthrough in human history has come from exactly this process. The people who said airplanes were impossible were reasoning by analogy. Birds are light, humans are heavy. Therefore, humans cannot fly. The people who built the airplane reasoned by first principles. What forces govern lift, drag, and thrust? What materials can achieve the required weight-to-strength ratio? What engine output is necessary? The technology did not exist, but the path to it did. Because physics does not care about human opinion. This is how the greatest operators think. Not, what do others believe about this problem? But what does the problem actually require? Whoever learns to reason this way gains a permanent, irreplaceable advantage over every competitor still trapped in conventional thinking. And it is not an exclusive gift. It is a discipline. It is a choice. It is available to anyone willing to do the uncomfortable work of questioning everything they think they know. Here is a truth that most motivational content refuses to say. Comfort is not neutral. Comfort is a slow drain. Every hour spent in a state of passive acceptance, scrolling, drifting, coasting, waiting, is an hour that cannot be reclaimed. The tragedy is not that people fail spectacularly. The tragedy is that most people fail invisibly. They never collapse dramatically. They simply shrink, year by year, opportunity by opportunity, dream by dream, until one day they look up and realize that the gap between where they are and where they could have been is so wide it feels impossible to cross. And then they stop believing they deserve to try. That is the real cost of comfort, not the absence of success, the erosion of belief. The builder who builds empires does not fear failure. They have a different relationship with it entirely. They understand that failure is not the opposite of success. It is the curriculum of success. Every engineering problem that came back wrong was a data point. Every launch that did not work as planned was a lesson that could not have been bought any other way. The difference between a person who fails and quits and a person who fails and grows is not talent. It is the frame. Is this failure information, or is it a verdict? For those who build extraordinary things, failure is always information. Brutal, expensive, embarrassing information, but information nonetheless. And information can be used. So while the comfortable person avoids the possibility of failure by avoiding the attempt, the builder moves through failure and emerges from it sharper, faster, more dangerous. This is not the era of the factory worker. This is not the era of the loyal employee. This is not even the era of the traditional entrepreneur. This is the era of leverage, and leverage, real leverage, has never been more available to more people than it is right now. Let that land. A single individual with a laptop, a working brain, and the discipline to execute can now reach more customers, build more systems, generate more income streams, and scale faster than a small corporation could 20 years ago. The tools exist. The infrastructure is there. The access is democratized in a way that has never existed before in human history. The question is not, does opportunity exist? The question is the person willing to pay the price to use it? Because opportunity is not the limiting factor. Attention is. Execution is. Discipline is. Wealth in the modern era is not built by working more hours. It is built by building systems that work without you. The person who works a job trades time for money. That is a transaction. The person who builds a system trades effort once for value that compounds. That is leverage. Consider the difference. The employee earns while present. The builder earns while sleeping, while traveling, while planning the next move. This is not magic. This is not luck. This is design. The wealthiest individuals alive did not simply work hard. They designed systems, products, platforms, technologies, teams that multiplied their effort beyond the limits of their personal hours. A human has 24 hours in a day. A system has no such ceiling. The first critical mental shift for anyone who wants to build real wealth is this. Stop thinking like an employee. Start thinking like an architect. Employees solve problems they are assigned. Architects design the environment in which problems get solved automatically. Employees optimize for their next paycheck. Architects optimize for the next decade. This is not arrogance. This is clarity. And clarity, applied consistently, compounds into a kind of power that the comfortable majority will always label as luck. The world sees the result. It does not see the process. It sees the rocket landing. It does not see the 1,000 nights of equations. It sees the product launch. It does not see the years of manufacturing failures, near bankruptcies, and sleepless problem-solving sessions. It sees the name in the headline. It does not see the version of that person who sat in an empty office after another failed prototype and had to decide, again, whether to continue. This selective visibility has created an enormous cultural problem. People want the result without the process. They want the outcome without the input. They want the harvest without the planting. And when reality delivers the opposite of what they expected, when the business does not pop in 60 days, when the skill does not monetize in 6 months, when the effort does not return visible dividends by next quarter, they conclude that they are not cut out for it. That is not a realistic assessment. That is impatience wearing the costume of self-awareness. The greatest operators alive share one universal discipline. They are willing to be unrecognized, unrewarded, and unvalidated for longer than average people can tolerate. That is the discipline. Not waking up at 4 a.m., not following a particular routine, not drinking a specific green juice. The discipline is continuing to execute when there is no evidence yet that execution is working. Continuing to build when the building looks like rubble. Continuing to believe when the external environment offers no confirmation. Time blocking is a tool, but the real productivity weapon is tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to work with precision and intensity in the absence of certainty. Most high-output individuals schedule their day to the minute, not because time is scarce, but because time is the most honest currency there is. Every minute committed to distraction is a minute not committed to building, and those minutes compound. A person who reclaims 3 hours a day from distraction and redirects them toward deliberate skill building, business development, or creative output will look in 5 years like a different species from the person who did not. That is not inspiration. That is arithmetic. Individual achievement is impressive, but scalable systems are transformative. The person who masters one skill and sells it for hours can build a decent life. The person who builds a system that delivers that skill at scale changes an industry. This is the fundamental insight behind every organization that outlasts its founder. Systems are not just about business. Systems are a mental model. The systems thinker does not ask, "How do I solve this problem today?" They ask, how do I design a process so this problem never appears again? Not firefighting, fire prevention. Better yet, a building that does not catch fire. When the system's mind looks at a broken process, it does not see frustration. It sees a design flaw, and design flaws can be corrected. Consider how industries fail. A logistics company keeps missing delivery windows. The non-systems thinker blames drivers, hires more drivers, increases pressure. The systems thinker examines the entire chain: route design, vehicle capacity, weather data inputs, depot scheduling, and identifies that the failure is in the planning software, not the people. Fix the system. Fix the output. This exact principle applies to personal productivity, to team management, to product development, to financial planning. The most effective individuals alive do not rely on willpower. They design environments that make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. They remove friction from what they want to do more of. They add friction to what they want to do less of. They do not trust their motivation. They engineer their conditions. Because motivation is weather. Systems are architecture. You cannot plan your year around what the weather will feel like. But you can build a house that functions in any weather. Build the house. Let the record show. Every great builder failed first. Not metaphorically, not softly, not in a way that could be romanticized in real time. They failed with full exposure. In front of colleagues, investors, press, and public. They failed when they had already committed everything, when there was no exit that did not cost them something precious. The electric vehicle nearly died. Not once, multiple times. The rocket company nearly collapsed after consecutive launch failures. The solar initiative bled money for years before the model held. These were not theoretical risks. These were lived moments of genuine collapse. And here is the truth that gets edited out of every success story. In those moments, the builder did not feel invincible. The builder felt exactly what any human being would feel: the cold, heavy weight of things not working. What made the difference was not the absence of that weight. It was the refusal to let that weight become a reason to stop. There is a concept called pain tolerance for mission. It describes the capacity to endure setbacks not because they do not hurt, but because the cost of abandoning the mission hurts more. When a person is deeply enough aligned with their purpose, when the mission is genuinely larger than the ego, failure loses some of its sting. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to get back up. Enough to analyze what went wrong. Enough to rebuild with what was learned. This is not a trait reserved for exceptional human beings. This is a capacity available to anyone who commits deeply enough to something worth fighting for. The person watching this, who has tried something and failed, who has been embarrassed, set back, told they were not realistic, that person is closer to the breakthrough than they think, because they have already paid part of the price. The curriculum is underway. The only question is whether they stay enrolled. There are people who consume content, and there are people who use it. The difference between those two groups is not intelligence. It is decision. The ones who commit, who return, who stay close to this kind of thinking, are building something over time. Not just watching, building. This space exists for that second group, the ones who take truth seriously. The global economy is undergoing a restructuring unlike anything seen since the Industrial Revolution. Artificial intelligence is not coming. It is here. It is not replacing jobs someday. It is changing the nature of value creation right now. And the vast majority of people are responding to this with either fear or dismissal. Both are the wrong response. The correct response is clarity. Here is what is actually happening. Repetitive, predictable, rule-based tasks at every level are being absorbed by intelligent systems. This is not a threat to be resisted. It is a shift to be understood and positioned for. The people who win in the next decade are not the ones who compete with AI. They are the ones who learn to think alongside it, using it as a force multiplier for human creativity, strategy, and judgment. The assembly line did not destroy manufacturing. It destroyed a specific kind of manufacturing labor and created enormous demand for engineers, designers, logistics managers, and supply chain architects. The same principle applies now. Intelligence tools are eliminating certain low-leverage tasks and simultaneously creating explosive demand for high-leverage ones. What is high leverage in this new world? Critical thinking, systems design, creative output, strategic leadership, emotional intelligence, mission-driven brand building. These are not soft skills. These are the hard currency of the new economy. The person who can synthesize information from multiple domains, form original frameworks, communicate those frameworks compellingly, and execute with precision in ambiguous conditions. That person is not replaceable. That person is irreplaceable. And the path to becoming that person starts with the decision to stop consuming information passively and start engaging with it actively. Start building a perspective. Start forming opinions based on first principles, not borrowed conclusions. Start creating, writing, speaking, designing, coding, making, anything that produces output, not just input. Output is where value lives. Everything else is preparation. There is a cost to ambition. It is real, it is steep, and it is almost never discussed honestly. The person who decides to build something meaningful will lose sleep, not occasionally, but regularly. They will lose relationships, some permanently. People who cannot understand the drive will leave. People who are threatened by it will become obstacles. They will lose money, often, repeatedly, and sometimes catastrophically. They will lose the comfort of certainty, the ability to say with confidence that they know what next month looks like, that their plan is going well, that success is guaranteed. They will face mockery from strangers on the internet, from colleagues who chose the safe path, from family members who love them but cannot understand why they keep pushing. This is not dramatic storytelling. This is the documented, consistent experience of every serious builder across every era. The great question is not whether this cost exists. It does. The great question is, what is the cost of not paying it? What does a life of unexpressed potential actually feel like at the end? What is the weight of the book that was never written? The business that was never launched? The idea that was never executed because the timing never felt quite right? There is a particular kind of regret that belongs to the person who had the capacity, but not the courage, who had the idea, but not the execution, who saw the window and waited until it closed. That regret is heavier than any failure, because failure means trying, and trying, at minimum, yields the lesson. But unexpressed potential yields nothing except the question of what might have been. The builders who changed industries, reshaped markets, and created things that will outlast them by centuries were not exempt from doubt. They simply chose the regret they could live with. They chose, "I tried, and it did not work," over, "I never tried." And that choice, made daily in small moments of courage, is the entire distance between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one. Risk is misunderstood. Popular culture presents risk as recklessness, as gambling, as the willingness to destroy everything on a hunch. That is not risk. That is chaos. True strategic risk is something far more disciplined. It begins with a ruthless analysis of probability. Not could this succeed, but what are the actual odds based on real data? Not am I afraid, but is this fear based on real danger or perceived danger? The most dangerous risks are the ones that feel safe. The guaranteed job that never builds a skill. The comfortable relationship that suppresses growth. The steady paycheck that funds a life too small for the person earning it. These feel like safety. They are slow-motion risk. Meanwhile, the risk that feels terrifying, leaving the job, launching the business, entering the market, often has a calculable floor. If this fails completely, what is the actual worst-case scenario? In most cases, the worst case is return to the starting position. Learn enormous amounts in the process. Try again with better information. That is not catastrophe. That is expensive education. The greatest operators are not fearless. They are precise about what they are afraid of. They distinguish between risks that can destroy the mission entirely and risks that are recoverable. Recoverable risks, even painful, expensive ones, are acceptable. Terminal risks, the kind from which recovery is impossible, are to be avoided with extreme care. But here is the most important truth about risk that most people will never be told. The calculation is asymmetric. If the upside of a risk is potentially enormous, a business that could scale globally, a skill that could generate unlimited income, a platform that could change how an industry operates, and the downside is merely painful but recoverable, then the person who does not take that risk is making a far worse financial and life decision than the person who does. The math is simple. The psychology is hard. But the psychology is not destiny. It is a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. One of the most expensive beliefs a builder carries is the belief that they must do everything themselves. This belief has a name. It is called the founder trap. And it kills more businesses than bad markets, bad timing, or bad products combined. The founder trap goes like this. No one can do this as well as I can. If I delegate it, it will not be done right. It is faster to just do it myself. Every sentence in that sequence is technically true in the short term and catastrophically false in the long term. Because the founder who does everything is not a founder. They are a self-employed laborer who happens to own their chain. The true leverage move is not doing more. It is enabling others to do well. This requires something psychologically demanding. Trust. Trust that people given the right standards, resources, and clarity of mission will rise to meet it. Trust that delegation, when done correctly, does not diminish output, it multiplies it. Trust that the job of the builder at scale is not to be the best engineer, the best designer, the best salesperson. but to create the conditions in which the best engineers, designers, and salespeople can do their best work. The greatest organizational minds do not hoard decision-making. They architect decision-making systems and reserve their personal cognitive load for the highest leverage problems, the ones only they can solve. This is not laziness. This is elite execution. And it starts with a brutal self-audit. What am I doing right now that someone else could learn to do at 80% of my effectiveness? That 80% is not a loss. That 80%, freed up from the founder's calendar, creates space for the 400% decisions, the strategic choices that only visionary leadership can make. Start there. Most people plan in days, some plan in months. The rare few plan in decades. And the difference in outcome between these three groups is not proportional. It is exponential. Here is why. When a person plans in days, every setback is a crisis. Every obstacle is a reason to reconsider. Every uncomfortable week feels like evidence that the direction is wrong. When a person plans in decades, a bad quarter is noise. A failed product launch is one data point among hundreds. A year of zero visible progress is simply part of the compound timeline. The horizon matters because it determines what counts as information and what counts as distraction. The great infrastructure builders of this era made decisions that made no financial sense in a 3-year window, but that positioned their industries for dominance across a 30-year window. Investing in rocket reusability when no market existed for it yet. Investing in battery technology when EVs were a fringe interest. Investing in satellite networks when global internet access was dismissed as impractical. None of these paid off in the short term. All of them positioned their owners ahead of entire civilizational curves. This is not hindsight. At the time, every single one of these decisions was mocked as delusional. The critics were reasoning in the short term. The builders were reasoning in the long term. And time, as it always does, resolved the debate. The practical lesson here is not to become a grand visionary overnight. The practical lesson is to extend the planning horizon intentionally. Ask not just, what does next month look like? But what does next decade look like if this direction compounds? Ask not, is this working yet? But, if this works as designed, what does the world look like in 10 years? These questions reframe the entire decision-making process. They make patience logical. They make short-term pain acceptable. They make the mission worth protecting. There is a mindset that traps more people in poverty than any external circumstance. It is called the scarcity loop. The scarcity loop sounds like this. I do not have enough money to invest in the right tools. I do not have enough time to build the right skills. I do not have the right connections to access the right opportunities. I do not come from the right background to compete at that level. Each sentence feels like a diagnosis. It is actually a decision. The decision to explain the present instead of engineering the future. Let the record show. Some of the most impactful companies in the last 30 years were built by people who had none of the above. No capital, no network, no prestigious background, no industry experience, no institutional support. What they had was specificity of vision and tolerance for discomfort. The scarcity loop is defeated not by suddenly acquiring resources, but by changing the question from what do I lack to what can I do with exactly what I have. This is not toxic positivity. This is resource optimization. The greatest product engineers are not the ones with the most components. They are the ones who do the most with the fewest components. Constraints are not the enemy of innovation. Constraints are often the catalyst. When there is no money for advertising, the builder learns content. When there is no team, the builder learns automation. When there is no access to markets, the builder builds the platform others access. Necessity is not just the mother of invention, it is the teacher of elegance. Some of the cleanest solutions in human history were born in the absence of all other options. The broke person who tells the truth, builds the skill, and delivers the value has access to the same global market as the person with the $1 million marketing budget. Because the internet does not ask for credentials, it responds to usefulness. And usefulness is one of the few things in the world that has never required a privilege to create. Ambition without execution is fantasy. Vision without daily discipline is decoration. The gap between where a person is and where they want to be is not filled with inspiration. It is filled with repetition. Boring, unrecognized, unsexy repetition. The daily writing session that no one reads yet. The daily coding practice that has not produced revenue yet. The daily business study that has not been applied yet. The daily health routine that has not produced visible results yet. The word that matters in every one of those sentences is yet, because this is the foundational truth of compounding effort. Nothing looks like it is working until it suddenly, unmistakably, overwhelmingly does. And by the time the outside world can see it, the builder has already been doing the invisible work for years. This is the deception that breaks most people. They begin, they execute, they see no results, they conclude it is not working. They stop, but they stopped in the dark, 5 minutes before dawn. The principle of delayed return is not a motivational concept. It is a physical reality. Seeds do not sprout in hours. Muscles do not grow in days. Skills do not monetize in weeks. Businesses do not compound in months. All of these operate on timelines that require patience, consistency, and the willingness to work without feedback. The most productive people alive have developed an almost clinical detachment from results. They do not measure the quality of their work by what the market has said yet. They measure it by the quality of the input, the precision of the effort, the intelligence of the execution, the depth of the commitment. They trust the math of compounding, because compounding is not a metaphor, it is a law. Small, consistent inputs applied over sufficient time produce nonlinear outputs. And the only thing that separates the person who experiences that nonlinear output from the person who never does is whether they stopped. Do not stop. In the modern economy, attention is infrastructure, not a nice-to-have, not a luxury for people who like being famous. Infrastructure. Because in a world where the supply of products, services, and content is effectively infinite, the limiting factor is not access, it is attention. The person or organization that consistently commands genuine attention, not borrowed, not manufactured, not artificially inflated, holds one of the most valuable assets in the current economy. And attention is earned through story, not through advertising, not through shouting, not through manufactured controversy, through a narrative that is true, specific, and aligned with something people care about. The most powerful personal brands in the world are not built on perfection. They are built on mission. People do not follow perfection, they follow direction. They follow someone who is clearly going somewhere, who has a specific understanding of a specific problem, who is willing to take a specific stance and hold it under pressure. The builder who articulates a clear mission, who can say precisely what they are building, why it matters, and who it is for, does not need to sell. They attract. This is not manipulation. This is alignment. When the message and the mission are the same thing, the marketing writes itself, because the audience is not being sold a product. They are being invited into a story they want to be part of. This is why the brands that outlast their founders are not about the founder. They are about what the founder stood for: the energy, the standards, the commitment to solving a real problem at an unreasonable level of ambition. That is not branding strategy. That is character expressed at scale. And character, consistent, visible, uncompromising character, is the most defensible competitive advantage any person or organization can hold. Most people invest money. Few people invest in themselves with the same seriousness. The greatest leverage any individual has is not capital, not connections, not even timing. It is compound personal development. The person who dedicates consistent time, daily, weekly, monthly, to improving their thinking, their skills, their physical condition, their emotional intelligence, and their strategic clarity, is building an asset that cannot be taken, cannot be inflated away, and does not depreciate. Every major skill adds a multiplier. A person who learns to write clearly can communicate ideas that change minds. A person who learns to code can automate systems that scale. A person who learns to sell ethically can take any product to any market. A person who learns to speak compellingly can lead, teach, inspire, and build. Each of these skills alone has financial and social value. Combined, they create a kind of compound human whose output capability grows exponentially with each addition. The great error most people make is that they stop learning after formal education ends, as though the diploma was the destination rather than the starting line. The builders who shape decades of industry are almost always voracious, lifelong learners, not because they were told to be, because they discovered that every hard problem they wanted to solve required them to understand something they did not yet understand. And the fastest path to solving the next problem was always to become the kind of person who already knew the answer. This is not complicated, but it requires a daily commitment to growth in a world that rewards distraction. Read the books that are harder than comfortable. Study the industries that are adjacent to the current lane. Learn the disciplines that seem unrelated until they unlock a new dimension of thinking. The mind that can think across domains, physics and psychology, engineering and empathy, finance and philosophy, sees solutions that pure specialists cannot, because the solution to most hard problems is not found inside the problem. It is found in a field that the problem holder never thought to study. At some point in a life lived with intention, a truth becomes undeniable. The separation between the people who shape history and the people who watch it being shaped is not talent. It is not connections. It is not resources. It is not even timing. It is the decision made in private, in the quiet of a moment no one will ever know about. To keep going. To keep building when the evidence is thin. To keep believing when the external world offers no confirmation. To keep executing when the results have not arrived. This decision, made consistently across months and years in the face of doubt and difficulty and the seductive comfort of giving up, is the entire story. Not the headline, not the product launch, not the stock price, not the magazine cover. The decision, made alone, in the dark, with everything uncertain. That is the whole thing, and it is available to every human being who chooses to make it. Not because the path is easy, because the path, for people who care enough about where it leads, is worth every single step. The people who understand this do not wait for permission. They do not wait for the right conditions. They do not wait for the fear to go away. They start with what they have, in the conditions they are in, and they improve as they go. That is the method. That is the entire method. Start, persist, improve, repeat. There is no shortcut. But there is a guarantee. The person who does this, who commits to this process and refuses to abandon it, will arrive somewhere they could not have imagined from the starting point. Not necessarily where they planned. Better. Because the journey itself builds a version of the person that the original plan could not have produced. Money is a measure, not a mission. This is perhaps the most misunderstood principle in entrepreneurship. The people who accumulate the most of it rarely had it as their primary target. They had a problem they were obsessed with solving, a future state they could not stop thinking about, a gap between what the world was and what it could be that they could not in good conscience ignore. And in the relentless pursuit of closing that gap, they created value at such scale that financial return was the inevitable byproduct. Profit arrives as the shadow of usefulness. Where genuine usefulness is created at scale, profit follows with mathematical certainty. The reverse is not always true. Chasing profit directly without a genuine value creation engine beneath it produces short-term gains and structural fragility. The businesses that last, the ones that outlive their founders and continue compounding across generations, are built on a foundation of genuine usefulness, something that solves a real problem for real people in a way that cannot easily be replicated. This is not abstract. This is the most practical business strategy available. Find the real problem. Solve it better than anyone else. Build the system that delivers that solution reliably and at scale. Protect the quality of the solution relentlessly. Everything else, the revenue, the valuation, the market share, is the output of that process, not the input. The person who chases the output often destroys the very foundation that would have produced it naturally. The person who obsesses over the input, the quality, the usefulness, the genuine value delivered, tends to produce outputs that eventually exceed all expectations. This is not luck. This is cause and effect. In a world that has normalized cynicism, optimism is a radical act, not naive optimism, not the refusal to see problems, not the willful blindness that ignores evidence. Calibrated optimism, the belief that problems, however large, are solvable, that intelligence applied with sufficient commitment can improve on any current state. This is not a soft belief. This is a strategic one. The cynical person sees the obstacle and concludes that the destination is unreachable. The optimistic mind sees the obstacle and begins calculating how to move it. Both are looking at the same obstacle. Only one of them is working on a solution. Cynicism feels intelligent. It requires no action. It produces no friction. It is never wrong in a way that demands accountability. Optimism is riskier. It commits to the possibility of a better outcome. It requires action. It can fail visibly, but it is the only orientation that has ever built anything worth having. Every technological breakthrough in human history was an act of optimism. Someone believed something was possible before there was any evidence to support it. That belief, expressed not in words but in years of disciplined work, eventually created the evidence. In 2026 and beyond, the challenges that face humanity are real. The problems are complex, the solutions are unclear, but the people who will solve them are already alive, already working, already convinced that what has not been done before does not mean it cannot be done. That conviction is not arrogance. It is the engine of every advance that has made life on this planet measurably better. Protect that conviction, feed it, apply it, because a world short on optimistic doers is a world short on progress. And progress, genuine, compounding, technology-enabled, human-driven progress, is not optional for a species that has decided to take its survival seriously. Everything heard in this video exists for one reason: not to inspire a temporary emotional state, not to generate a feeling of motivation that lasts until the next distraction, but to deliver a framework, a way of thinking, a set of principles that, if actually applied, not just absorbed, not just agreed with, but applied, will change the trajectory of any life they touch. Here is the framework in its simplest form. Think from first principles. Question every assumption. Build systems, not just actions. Take calculated risks with asymmetric upside. Tolerate failure as curriculum. Execute consistently in the absence of results. Invest in compound human development every single day. Extend the planning horizon from months to decades. Create usefulness at scale. Let profit follow. Choose optimism as a discipline, not a mood. And absolutely refuse to let the comfort of doing nothing masquerade as safety. Because it is not safety. It is the slowest, most invisible form of loss there is. The person watching this right now, wherever they are, whatever they are working on, however far they feel from where they want to be, they are not too late. They are not too small. They are not too ordinary. The only thing that has ever stopped a capable person from building something extraordinary is the belief that they could not. And beliefs can change, not slowly, not with years of therapy or permission or ideal conditions. In a moment, in a decision, in the next hour that follows this one, used differently than the last. The blueprint exists, the tools exist, the market exists, the moment exists. The question is not whether the opportunity is real. The question is whether the person watching this will make the decision right now, in this moment, to take it seriously. The world does not need more people who understood what was possible. It needs more people who did something about it. The people who have stayed through this entire video are not the casual ones. They are the ones who needed it, the ones who felt something in it. Those are the people this space was built for. The ones who return, the ones who bring others back with them, the ones who act on what they hear instead of filing it under interesting. This is not a notification button. It is a commitment to staying close to thinking that matters.